Hang on, what's this? Another flagship killer? It's the OnePlus 15. My job is confusing sometimes. So, the OnePlus 13 came out in January this year. It's now November, and we have its successor, the OnePlus 15. I can't think of another phone. Let me know in the comments if you can think of one, but I can't think of another phone that has been replaced that quickly. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Do I care? Not really. It gives me something new to talk about. And as you can see, the new one looks very different to the old one. The other thing that's very interesting and exciting about this is the fact that the OnePlus 13 was fantastic and is fantastic. If you bought this today, it's still a brilliant phone, and a lot of people, myself included, think that it punches well above its weight. Now, it's not a cheap phone. This isn't a cheap phone either, but they're both cheaper than flagships like the S25 Ultra and the iPhone 17 Pro Max, which makes them very interesting. What's even more interesting is that this might not be on your radar. It's one of those things where, unless you live in this tech bubble and you're really into your phones, I still think not that many people know what the OnePlus 15 is, or what the Oppo Find X9 Pro is, which, yes, they do look very similar. It's that weird thing where I speak to my mates, my family, and they say, "What are you reviewing this week then, Mark?" And I say, "Oh, it's the OnePlus 15. And they say, "The what?" OnePlus has been around since 2013, and it deserves more recognition, I think, particularly when they do stuff like this. Let's get into it. Right, let's go through these specs very quickly. So it's the first phone with the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 chip. There's two versions, 12 gig of RAM and 256 gig of storage, or 16 gig of RAM and 512 gig of storage. The display is 6.78 inches, it's AMOLED, and it has a variable refresh rate of up to 165 Hz. It has a quad IP rating, IP66, 68, 69, and 69K. It has a 7,300 milliamp hour battery. I'll get to that later. And it has Wi-Fi 7 with a dedicated Wi-Fi chip, and lots of other specs which I don't just want to read from a PDF in this review. The pricing is £849 in the UK for the 256 gig version and £979 for the 512 gig version. However, if you buy the 512 gig version before the 12th of December, you get 100 quid off, which is nice. If you're wondering, the Oppo Find X9 Pro is £1,099 for the 512 gig version. So the OnePlus 15 is cheaper than this, and it's still cheaper than the S25 Ultra and the iPhone 17 Pro Max. So it's still very interesting. Let's talk about this design because it is so different from the OnePlus 13, and for me that's a good thing because it gives me something to talk about. However, I appreciate that brand fans can get very nervous about big sweeping changes like this, and it is so different. I mean, just from the back, circular camera bump, square camera bump. Now, there are lots of clever marketing terms and fancy design noises that OnePlus are making about the design for this, but for me, it just looks really cool. It looks much more modern than this, I think. And also, and I don't know why smartphone manufacturers keep going backwards and forwards with this, but one of the biggest changes is the sides. The outer circumference of the phone is now matte as opposed to being shiny. Like I say, I don't know why smartphone manufacturers go backwards and forwards between that, but they do that. I'm not sure what I prefer. On certain phones, that glossy thing works, but on other phones, who cares? It looks massively different. There are three different colors. There's this one, which is ultraviolet, which kind of changes in the light, which is very interesting. There's a very smart black version, and there's the hero color, which is Sandstorm, which I wish I had, to be honest. I've seen someone else with that and it looks amazing. But it is just a very smart looking phone. The display, like I mentioned earlier, it's 165 Hz. That's the variable refresh rate. And normally we get 120 Hz. The first thing to say is that you do not notice that difference in those Hertz in normal everyday life, because I don't think it's always active, to be honest. I think it's very dependent on the app, on the thing that you're doing in the operating system, and it's mainly geared towards gaming, I think. But again, you'll only know it's there and switched on for certain games that are optimizing for that 165 Hz refresh rate. It's a bit of a marketing thing, and there is a downside. Well, there's possibly two downsides. One of them is the fact that this is a 1.5K resolution as opposed to 2K, and that will bother some people. It doesn't bother me at all, but it may bother some people. And there's an argument to say that that higher refresh rate might have an impact on the battery life. It's also indicative of the fact that we've got to the point now with smartphones where what else do you talk about? You can increase things and make things better than higher numbers than they were before. But the reality of that is that you don't really notice it in everyday life. I don't envy smartphone manufacturers. They have to do something different each year, and it's getting harder and harder to do that. But where they can make improvements are the camera system and the battery. So let's get straight into those. The camera system, let's, for your sake, but mainly my sake, keep this very simple in terms of specs. We have three 50 megapixel cameras on the back. The telephoto has a 3.5 times optical zoom and up to 120 times digital zoom. It shoots 4K 120 frames per second Dolby Vision video, and that's it really in terms of the specs. It doesn't have the wacky 200 megapixel lossless zoom of the Oppo Find X9 Pro, and it doesn't have that wacky teleconverter thing that you can stick to the back of this either. Does that matter? Not really. If you're just going to point this at things and take photos and occasionally zoom in, this is one of the best camera systems on the market. The photos I'm showing you now are a mixture of things I've shot in Prague when I went to the briefing for the OnePlus 15, and also just regular family out and about photos. And as always, I just take these straight out of the camera. There's no processing. It's just open the camera app, press a button and see what comes out. There are some hits and misses. It didn't deal with the fireworks particularly well, but that might just have been my framing and my shooting. I have no idea. But generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, this takes wonderful photos. This is very subjective, and as always, guys, I ask you to get involved in the comments and let me know what you think. But I've always loved OnePlus photography. The OnePlus 13 is a fantastic camera, and the OnePlus 15 is no different. Well, it is a bit different because it's newer and it is slightly improved, but trust me, you're not going to be disappointed with what the OnePlus 15 does when you take photos with it. Video, okay, the iPhone remains the video king, but this does a very good job. It even has an underwater mode, which I didn't try. I mean, it was raining a lot in Prague and it was almost underwater there, but joking apart, if you do want to take this underwater and do some fancy photography there, you can do that. And as for the zoom, anything beyond 7 times, which is the kind of lossless maximum digital zoom, I think. Anything beyond that, so once you start getting into the realm of 10, 20, 30, 120x, like every other smartphone I've tried, it's incredibly hit and miss, and it's very AI-ified. Again, that isn't my use case. If you love zooming into things like that, then let me know what you think. But for me, the standard zoom options on the OnePlus 15 are wonderful. In terms of being a flagship killer when it comes to photography, let's talk about the battery. This has a 7,300 milliamp hour battery, which is 200 milliamps below the Oppo Find X9 Pro. Does that matter? Well, actually, it does if you are an extreme battery user. If you really put your phone to task in terms of gaming and really intensive stuff. My friend Ben from Lover of Tech has discovered that the Oppo Find X9 Pro is still the king. It still beats this, I think, in his battery test by about 2 hours. And both of them are miles beyond the iPhone 17 Pro Max as a point of reference. So it is still incredible, but this is definitely the winner. But 7,300 milliamp hours, and it has this SuperVOOC charging, 120 watt SuperVOOC charging. This is a SuperVOOC portable charger, and if I plug this in, I immediately get told that it is doing ultra fast charging via SuperVOOC, and this depletes very quickly when you do that, but as you can see, that charges very quickly as well. This makes a huge difference. In my testing, which is nothing like Ben's, I got 4 days and 19 hours out of this phone, and it still had 14% remaining, which according to the operating system could last another 5 hours. In everyday use, it just goes on and on and on. It's easily for most people a 3-day phone, and having experienced that on the Oppo as well, it is game changing. And some of the other brands need to start catching up. And yes, if you're wondering about the battery technology in this phone, it is the silicon kryptonite thing, which means it should have good health as well. So OnePlus is saying that after 4 years, you'll still have 80% battery health. What's not to like? Performance. I don't do benchmarks. If you're new to this channel, it just doesn't interest me at all. I find it teeth-itchingly boring. But if you do care about that stuff, the one thing I will say, having spoken again to my mate Ben at Lover of Tech, is that apparently, according to him, the MediaTek chip in this is a bit better than the Snapdragon chip in here. I won't put words in his mouth, but he is very, very impressed with what this has under the hood. That said, in everyday life, these feel identical, because of course they do. It's only when you go into those upper echelons of performance, the kind of gaming stuff and whatever else people do with their phones that really pushes the boundaries. That is where you might find differences between these two. But the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 5 is still an incredibly capable chip. It's a flagship chip. We will see the same chip in the S26 Ultra from Samsung next year. But in terms of everyday use, they all feel the same, all of these phones. It also has Oxygen OS 16, which is OnePlus's version of Android 16. And this might be controversial among my fellow tech reviewers, but I find it very hard to split the difference between these different versions of Android. They all feel very similar to me. I know that's an unpopular opinion, and as always, get involved in the comments with your thoughts on Oxygen OS versus all the other stuff that's out there, but it's great. It does a really good job of Android. Yes, there's some bloatware on there that you can just uninstall, but apart from that, it's a really clean looking user interface and I like using it. It has all of the AI stuff, obviously, including something called Mind Space, which is very similar to the Nothing Essential Space. It even has its own key here, so you can tap that and put web pages into it and voice notes and all that sort of stuff. It's a great idea, and you can ask it questions, so you can use AI to find stuff in your mind space. I think if I was using this regularly and it was my main phone, I might use that. That's an example of AI being put to good use, but it has all the other stuff, all of the image manipulation and the help with text, all the stuff that I don't use basically. It's all in there. So if you buy this phone, you'll get the performance and you'll get the AI stuff, and you'll get a lovely version of Android 16. And this brings me to my conclusion about the OnePlus 15. The OnePlus 15, that's not it. The OnePlus 15 is another smash hit, and it's another example of why sometimes you should look past the obvious. Now, whether or not you're deciding between the iPhone 17 Pro Max and this or another flagship, and it's up to you, obviously, but I think given the price, the battery, the display technology, the flagship design, everything about this. Oh, the flagship chip, it's got the latest Snapdragon chip in it. This is so tempting. It must be tempting over phones like this, unless you are an Apple person. But the big question, should you go for the Oppo Find X9 Pro or the OnePlus 15? And this is a very, very tricky choice. I do have to pick one, I know, because if I don't, quite rightly, you guys will roast me in the comments. Okay, think about this. It's a bit like picking your favorite child, because I love both these phones. If I had to pick one, I think, I think it would be the OnePlus. It would be the OnePlus 15 in the Sandstorm, whatever it's called, colour. Because it's slightly cheaper and it feels very similar to the Oppo. That's the main reason. But then I would see this somewhere and think, oh no, it's got the Hasselblad logo on it, and it's so hard. If you're choosing between these two, firstly, get involved down below. Let me know what you think. And also, I don't envy you at all. It's a difficult but lovely choice to have. Guys, thank you for watching this video. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, you know what to do. Give it a like, do all that stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.